It was a cold place. The wind came down from high ridges, swept across the empty slopes with a sound like a low whisper. Snow lay deep upon the land, covering the rocks, covering the stunted trees. The mountain looked hard and quiet under the pale winter sun. At night, with clear skies, the stars were bright and sharp. People in nearby sparse villages had long called this range a hard place to live in a place that did not welcome visitors easily. The air was thin, the silence was vast, broken only by the howl of the wind. This was the Ural Mountains in the heart of winter. The peak they aimed for had a name that meant Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language. It was not a name given lightly. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student. He was the planner, mapped the route and organized the expedition. His friends trusted his judgment, a serious, methodical leader who avoided unnecessary risks. With him were 8 others, each bringing their own strength. Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Yuri Yudin would turn back early due to illness, a twist of fate that would save his life and haunt him for decades. Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Krivonishenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, the veteran hiking instructor. Together they were a formidable team. They kept detailed journals. They took many photographs during the first week. Records that show a normal, challenging expedition. As they moved higher into the mountains, the landscape changed. Dense forests gave way to sparse, twisted trees, then open, wind-blasted slopes. They were entering the true wilderness, far from any road or settlement. The diary entries from this period remain calm. The group notes worsening weather and the difficulty of the terrain, their tone factual and determined. On their last full day of hiking, they made a critical decision. A storm was moving in. Visibility was dropping. They decided to make camp on the exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl, the Dead Mountain. It was not a perfect place to camp. Standard practice would have been to descend about a mile to the forest line, where trees would offer better protection. Setting up on the slope may have been a training exercise, or they were simply too tired to go further. They prepared for a cold but manageable night. They were scheduled to send a telegram from a village on February 12th. When that day came and went with no word, no one was immediately alarmed. Delays were common on such expeditions. Days passed, a week, then 2. Worry grew among families and friends. A rescue team was assembled. Fellow students, teachers, soldiers, pilots with planes. They began to search the vast, empty wilderness along the intended route. For days, they found nothing. Search planes flew over the white expanse, pilots scanning for any sign of life, looking for a splash of color from a tent or a piece of clothing. What the search party eventually found on February 26th was not a simple accident. It was strange. It was silent. It was deeply chilling. The camp looked wrong from the moment the searchers saw it. The large canvas tent was collapsed and partially covered in snow. It was pitched on a gentle slope, far from any obvious danger, like an avalanche path. One of the first things the rescuers noticed was a large, jagged opening in the side of the tent. It was not a tear from the wind or an animal. The edges of the fabric showed that it had been cut open with a knife, but from the inside. Inside the tent, the scene was one of frozen, orderly chaos. Boots were lined up near the entrance. Extra clothes were folded. Bags of food, including bread, pieces of salted pork, were ready to be eaten. A flask of vodka was untouched. It was clear that no one had packed to leave. It looked as if the group had been settling in for the night when something sudden and terrifying had happened, causing them to abandon their only shelter without a moment's hesitation. Outside the tent, in the windswept snow, the searchers found the next piece of the puzzle. There were footprints. A line of them led away from the damaged tent, down the slope toward the distant tree line over 1 kilometer away. The prints showed definite haste. They were not the measured steps of people walking calmly. They were the tracks of people running, stumbling, fleeing. The most disturbing detail, many prints were made by people who were barefoot. Others, feet clad only in socks. Others, a single boot. The line of footprints continued down the slope in a relatively straight path. The tracks showed the group stayed together, at least at first. They moved as one, away from the perceived threat at their campsite. Why run downhill, away from shelter and into the open? The wind would have been brutal, biting with every second. The footprints continued for about 500 meters, then became scattered, then disappeared under windblown snow. The marks in the snow showed no one else was with them. Only the prints of the 9 hikers. No signs of a chase, no signs of a struggle with an outside party. They had run from something, but it left no tracks of its own. The lack of proper footwear was a death sentence. Bare feet would freeze solid in minutes. Pain, then numbness, then rapid severe frostbite. They ran so far anyway. That tells you how scared they were. They weren't thinking about the cold. They weren't thinking about their feet. They were only thinking about getting away from the tent. The silent tracks in the snow, testament to their final, frantic moments of terror. Following the trail of footprints downhill, the search party made their first grim discovery near the edge of the forest. Under a large ancient cedar tree, they found the remains of a small fire. Next to the fire lay a body, Yuri Krivonishenko, and another, Yuri Doroshenko. They were stripped down to their underwear. Their hands were raw and scraped. The branches of the cedar above them were broken up to about 5 meters. It looked as if they'd been desperately trying to climb the tree, to get a view or escape something on the ground. The 2 men had clearly died of hypothermia. They had fought to stay alive, building a fire, but the overwhelming cold had won. Their positions suggested a final agonizing struggle. One man lay on his back, arms crossed over his chest. The other lay face down in the snow. Their discovery deepened the mystery. Why were they in their underwear? A rare phenomenon called paradoxical undressing can occur in late-stage hypothermia. The victim feels intense heat and may remove clothing. About 300 meters up the slope toward the tent, the searchers found another body. It was Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader. He lay on his back, one hand clutching a small birch branch. His other arm was raised as if shielding his face from wind. He was better dressed than the first 2, but still inadequately for the conditions. His posture looked defiant, as if he'd tried to fight back to the abandoned tent, to the only hope of survival. He, too, had succumbed to the cold. Not far from Dyatlov, they found Zinaida Kolmogorova. She lay face down, frozen, mid-crawl. Her trail in the snow showed she had been moving uphill toward the tent. Her hands were bruised and bloodied. She had fought harder and travelled further than the others found that day. The 5th body, Rustem Slobodin, was found between her and Dyatlov. He had a small skull fracture, later judged non-fatal by doctors. Like the others, the official cause of death was hypothermia. 5 hikers were found, but 4 were still missing. The search for the remaining 4 hikers continued for more than 2 months. The winter snows were deep. The search area was vast. It was not until May, when the spring thaw began to melt the snowpack, that the final bodies were discovered. They were found in a ravine about 75 meters further into the woods from the cedar tree, where the first 2 bodies had been located. Buried under 4 meters of snow in a makeshift den they had apparently dug for themselves. These last 4 hikers were better dressed than the others, some wearing clothes taken from their friends who had already died. This final discovery brought the most disturbing and inexplicable evidence of the entire case. Unlike the first 5 victims, these 4 had not died from hypothermia alone. They had suffered massive, violent internal injuries. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had a severely fractured skull, a wound so catastrophic it was comparable to being hit by a car. Lyudmila Dubinina, numerous broken ribs. Semyon Zolotaryov, numerous broken ribs. The autopsy doctor noted the force required was immense, yet there were no external bruises or soft tissue damage. The injuries were bizarre and horrifying. Dubinina was missing her tongue. Dubinina was missing her eyes. Dubinina was missing part of the tissue from her face. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes. Alexander Kolevatov had less severe injuries, but had also died in the ravine. The nature of these wounds defied simple explanation. An animal attack was considered. Scavengers typically leave different patterns of damage. The missing tongue was a haunting detail that fueled speculation for years to come. Some of the clothing worn by these last victims was found to be radioactive. When tested with a Geiger counter, a few items, particularly a sweater and a pair of pants, showed levels of beta radiation significantly higher than normal background levels. The source of this radiation was never determined. It was a small but powerful clue pointing away from natural causes towards something far more unusual. The case was no longer just a tragic hiking accident. It was a profound and terrifying mystery. The story told by the silent ripped tent was one of pure, unreasoning terror. Over the years, dozens of theories have been proposed to explain what happened on that frozen slope. They range from the plausible to the fantastic: attacks by escaped prisoners, a secret military weapons test, an encounter with a Yeti, and even abduction by aliens. The Soviet investigation at the time concluded the hikers had died as a result of a compelling unknown force. This vague finding only served to deepen the public's fascination and suspicion. Most of the wilder theories can be dismissed due to a lack of evidence. One of the more sober and scientifically grounded theories has gained traction in recent years. It involves a rare type of avalanche known as a slab avalanche. In this scenario, a large plate of hardened snow could have slid down onto the tent. This would not be a massive, thundering avalanche, but a smaller, quieter event. The weight of the snow slab could have been enough to cause the severe chest and skull injuries seen on some of the victims, crushing them inside the tent without leaving major external marks. This sudden, terrifying event could have triggered their panicked flight. The slab avalanche theory explains the cut tent. They would have had to slash their way out of the collapsed, snow-covered shelter. It explains why they ran without shoes or coats, fleeing an immediate, life-threatening situation. Once outside in the blizzard, disoriented and suffering from initial injuries, hypothermia and poor decisions would have done the rest. The paradoxical undressing could explain the lack of clothing on the first bodies found. However, even this calm and plausible theory has holes that keep the mystery alive. Experienced hikers like Dyatlov would have been unlikely to camp in a location prone to any kind of avalanche, no matter how small. Investigators at the scene reported no obvious signs of a snowslide. The footprints leading from the tent were orderly at first, not the chaotic scramble one might expect from people fleeing a collapsing tent. And the theory does not offer a satisfying explanation for the traces of radiation found on the clothing. It is a good explanation, but it is not a perfect one. We may never know with absolute certainty what happened to the 9 hikers on Dead Mountain. The official records were sealed for years, and even after being opened, they are incomplete. Key pieces of evidence may have been lost or overlooked in the initial investigation. The story has been retold so many times that fact has become entangled with fiction. Experts continue to argue new scientific studies offer fresh perspectives. The core truth remains just out of reach, buried under the snows of time. Perhaps the answer lies not in a single dramatic event, but in a strange and unlikely cascade of factors. Perhaps there was a natural phenomenon like infrasound generated by a specific wind pattern over the ridge, causing intense, directionless panic. This could have driven them from the tent. Once outside the brutal cold, the darkness, the wind, their pre-existing injuries would have created a spiral of confusion and tragedy.